Ever feel like you're constantly swimming upstream, just trying to keep up with, the demands of the world? Like everyone's telling you to hustle harder, want more, and yet it can leave you feeling, I don't know, emptier than ever.
Yeah,
What if there was a different path, a way to move through life with, you know, more ease and grace? Well, today we're diving into a philosophy that explores just that, Taoism. And trust me, even though this wisdom is over 2,500 years old, it feels incredibly relevant to the challenges we face in our modern life.
yeah. It's true. There's a reason why Taoism continues to resonate across cultures and centuries. It speaks to a deep human longing for balance and harmony, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
Right, and at the heart of Taoism is this enigmatic figure, Laozi. He's shrouded in so much mystery that some scholars even debate whether he was a real person or more of a mythical sage.
Yeah, it is part of what makes Laozi so fascinating. The stories surrounding him feel almost legendary.
Mm.
Um, Imagine this. Laozi, a keeper of archives, surrounded by ancient scrolls and wisdom, he becomes disillusioned with the corruption and chaos that he sees in the world and decides to leave it all behind.
So he just rides off into the wilderness?
Essentially, the story goes that he hopped on an ox and headed west, seeking a simpler, more authentic existence. But before he disappeared completely, he had a fateful encounter with a border guard. The guard, sensing Laozi's wisdom, pleaded with him to write down his teachings for the good of humanity.
And that's how we got the Tao Te Ching, the foundational text of Taoism.
That's the legend, this incredibly influential text born from a chance encounter on the edge of civilization. It's enough to make you wonder about all the wisdom. That might be lost to history, just waiting for the right moment to resurface.
Okay, so I've got this mysterious wise man and his book of wisdom. But what exactly is the Tao? It seems to be at the core of everything Laozi taught.
Yeah. The Tao, also written as Tao, is often described as the way or the path. But it's so much more than a physical road you walk down. It's the underlying principle of the universe, the force that flows through all things, connecting them in a web of interdependence.
So it's kind of like the Force in Star Wars, this unseen energy that binds everything together.
You're on the right track.
Hmm.
But what makes the Tao so fascinating and so challenging to grasp is that it's ultimately beyond words and definitions, as Laozi himself wrote in the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao.
Hmm. It's like trying to capture the essence of the wind. You can feel its power, but you can't quite grasp it in your hands.
Exactly. And that's what makes exploring Taoism so enriching. It's not about memorizing a set of doctrines, but about embarking on a journey of self-discovery and aligning ourselves with this universal flow.
So if the Tao is this indescribable force that flows through everything, how do we actually tap into it? How do we live in a way that's aligned with this universal principle?
Yeah, that's where Laozi's teachings become incredibly practical, even in our modern world. One of the most well-known and often misunderstood concepts in Taoism is Wu Wei.
I've heard of that. It's usually translated as non-action or effortless action. But those translations always seemed a bit contradictory to me.
They do, don't they? Because it's not about becoming passive or simply letting life happen to you. It's more about aligning yourself with the natural flow of the Tao, rather than constantly trying to force things or swim against the current.
Okay, so instead of stressing and striving, it's about finding a way to move through life with more ease. I can see how that would be appealing in our always-on go-go-go culture.
Exactly. Imagine a river flowing downhill.
Hmm.
It reaches the ocean not by brute force, but by following the path of least resistance. Wu Wei is about cultivating that same sense of effortless action in our own lives.
So how do we actually do that? How do we know when to act and when to surrender to the flow?
It requires a delicate balance of intuition and observation. It's about learning to recognize the natural rhythms of life, both internally and externally, and then acting in harmony with those rhythms.
Can you give an example of what this might look like in a real-life situation?
Sure. Let's say you're feeling overwhelmed with work, like you have a million things on your to-do list. The go-getter mentality might tell you to just power through it, to work longer and harder. But a more Taoist approach might involve taking a step back, reassessing your priorities, and perhaps even delegating tasks, or finding ways to simplify your workload.
So it's not about laziness or giving up. It's about working smarter, not harder, and finding a pace that's sustainable in the long run.
Precisely. And this idea of balance leads us to another core concept in Taoism, yin and yang. You've probably seen the symbol, a circle divided into two swirling halves, one black and one white, each containing a seed of the opposite color.
Yes. It's become such a recognizable symbol, even outside of its philosophical context.
And for a good reason. The yin and yang represents the interconnectedness of seemingly opposite forces, light and dark, active and passive, masculine and feminine. It reminds us that these dualities aren't actually separate, but rather two sides of the same coin. They exist in a dynamic relationship, constantly flowing into and influencing each other.
So it's not about striving for one extreme or the other, but about finding that sweet spot of balance between the two.
Exactly. And this applies to so many areas of life. We often get caught up in the idea that we need to be on all the time, productive, outgoing, achieving. But Taoism reminds us that rest and reflection are just as important as action and ambition.
So that's saying you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. Ignoring our need for yin time, for quiet contemplation, for nurturing ourselves, ultimately leads to burnout and imbalance.
This makes me think about our earlier conversation about Wu Wei. Is there a connection between embracing the balance of yin and yang and finding that sense of effortless action?
Absolutely. When we resist the natural cycles of life, when we push too hard for yang without honoring our need for yin, we create resistance and suffering. But when we can find that harmonious balance within ourselves, our actions tend to flow more effortlessly.
It's like we're no longer fighting against ourselves or against the current of life.
Precisely. And this acceptance of life's natural cycles also encourages a sense of simplicity and detachment from material desires, another key principle in Taoism.
Simplicity and detachment, those feel pretty radical in our current culture, which often equates success with,
Mhm.
acquiring more stuff. How does Taoism navigate that tension?
Yeah, it goes back to recognizing that true happiness and fulfillment come not from external possessions, but from cultivating inner peace and contentment. Laozi suggests we shift our focus from having more to being more.
So it's about finding contentment and even joy in what we already have, rather than always chasing after, the next shiny object.
Precisely. And this principle of simplicity, this detachment from material desires, connects back to what we were discussing about leadership. Laozi wasn't a fan of rulers who governed through force or control. He believed true leadership wasn't about amassing power, but about empowering others.
So less of a command and control approach and more about guiding and inspiring people.
Exactly. Laozi envisioned an ideal leader, a sage who embodies Taoist principles, someone who leads by example, with humility and wisdom, trusting the natural order of things, even in social and political structures.
It sounds like a radically different approach to leadership than what we often see in the world today.
It certainly challenges many conventional notions about power and authority. Laozi recognized that trying to control everything, to impose our will on the world, ultimately creates resistance and disharmony.
It reminds me of that line from the Tao Te Ching you quoted earlier. The more laws and restrictions there are, the poorer people become. It's like the tighter you grip, the more slips through your fingers.
Exactly. And this brings us back full circle to the concept of Wu Wei. Effective leadership, in a Taoist sense, is about understanding when to act and when to step back, when to guide and when to allow things to unfold naturally.
So all of these threads, Wu Wei, yin and yang, simplicity, leadership, they're all interwoven expressions of this deeper philosophy
Right.
of aligning ourselves with the Tao.
Yes. And is this interconnectedness that makes the Tao Te Ching, Laozi's collection of teachings, such a rich and enduring text. It's not a step-by-step guidebook, but rather a series of poetic reflections, often paradoxical, that invite us to contemplate the nature of existence and our place within it.
And given its age, it's amazing how relevant these ancient teachings feel today, whether we're grappling with career decisions, relationship challenges, or just trying to navigate the constant barrage of information. In the digital age, it feels like there's a lot we can learn. From Laozi's wisdom about finding balance, embracing simplicity, and moving through life with more grace and ease.
Absolutely. And I think that's the power of exploring these ancient philosophies. They offer us a different lens through which to view our modern world, a reminder that the answers we seek often lie in connecting with something deeper, something timeless within ourselves and the universe around us.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what other wisdom might be hidden away in those ancient scrolls, just waiting to be rediscovered. This has been a really fascinating deep dive. Thank you for joining us today.